There's a strange moment that happens on almost every flight. Most passengers never notice it. The plane begins taxiing toward the runway. Engines grow louder. Seatbelts click shut across the cabin. Some people stare out the window. Some scroll through downloaded movies. Some are already half asleep before the plane even leaves the ground. But the flight attendants? They suddenly become very still. They stop walking through the aisle, stop talking, stop smiling at passengers. And then they take their seats, back straight, feet flat on the floor, eyes forward. And then comes the strange part. Their hands disappear underneath their thighs, not casually, deliberately, almost like they're bracing for something. And once you notice it, it's hard to stop wondering about it. Because it looks oddly serious for something passengers barely think about. So why do they do it? Is it superstition? A comfort technique? A hidden aviation ritual? Or is there something happening during takeoff that most passengers never realize? Because as it turns out, that tiny movement is connected to decades of aviation history, crash research, emergency psychology, and one important reality about flying. Takeoff is one of the most dangerous moments of any flight. Welcome to Ordinary Things' Deep History, where ordinary details usually hide surprisingly deep stories behind them. Today, flying feels normal, almost boring. You book a ticket, walk through security, sit in a metal tube for a few hours, and somehow that metal tube crosses entire countries, or oceans, through the sky. Modern aviation became so reliable that most passengers barely think about how extraordinary it actually is. But inside aviation itself, there's no such thing as routine. Everything is procedure. Everything is calculated. Even posture. For passengers, takeoff lasts maybe a minute or two. But for the crew, it's considered a critical phase of flight. And in aviation, those words matter. Because statistically, the majority of serious aviation incidents happen during two specific moments: takeoff and landing. Not cruising peacefully above the clouds. Takeoff and landing. That's why cabin crews suddenly become more focused during these phases. Their posture changes, their attention sharpens, and every movement becomes intentional. To understand why flight attendants sit on their hands, we need to go back to the early days of commercial aviation, back when flying was still new, unpredictable, and, honestly, a little terrifying. In the 1920s and 1930s, airplanes looked nothing like modern passenger jets. Cabins were noisy, flights were rough, turbulence was common, and safety standards were still developing. At the time, flight attendants, called stewardesses back then, weren't hired primarily for safety. They were hired for comfort. Many came from nursing backgrounds. Their job was to serve meals, calm nervous passengers, provide reassurance during flights. Because early air travel had one major problem. People were scared of flying. And honestly, they had good reason to be. Aircraft technology improved quickly, but regulations struggled to keep up. As passenger numbers increased, accidents also became more common, and every accident revealed weaknesses. Investigators began studying crashes in extraordinary detail. What caused injuries? Why did evacuations fail? Which positions improved survival? Over time, aviation authorities realized something important. Safety couldn't depend on improvisation. Every emergency needed procedure. Every procedure needed training. And every phase of flight needed preparation. By the mid-20th century, the role of flight attendants changed completely. They were no longer viewed simply as onboard hosts. They became trained emergency professionals, people responsible for evacuations, firefighting, emergency medical situations, crowd control under extreme stress. And suddenly, small details mattered enormously, even how crew members sat during takeoff. Researchers studying crash survival discovered something fascinating. The human body reacts very differently to sudden force depending on posture. If the body is loose or unprepared during impact, limbs move violently. Arms flail outward, wrists strike nearby structures, shoulders twist unnaturally, and in emergencies, even relatively small injuries matter. Because flight attendants don't just need to survive impact, they need to remain functional immediately afterward. Within seconds of an emergency landing, crew members may need to open emergency exits, direct evacuations, assist injured passengers, stop panic from spreading through the cabin. So airlines began training cabin crews to reduce injury risk as much as possible. And that's where the seated safety posture comes in. The posture itself is carefully engineered. Back straight, seatbelt tight, feet planted firmly on the floor, and hands secured underneath the thighs. At first glance, sitting on your hands sounds strange, but the reasoning is actually simple. By placing their hands beneath their thighs, flight attendants prevent uncontrolled arm movement during sudden deceleration or impact. It stabilizes the upper body. It reduces the chance of fractures or dislocations, and it helps keep the body aligned during violent motion. In aviation, even tiny reductions in injury risk matter, because a functional crew can save lives after impact. But there's another layer to this posture most passengers never realize. It's psychological too, because while seated during takeoff, flight attendants aren't simply waiting. They're mentally rehearsing emergencies. This is known as a silent review. During this process, crew members mentally repeat emergency commands, exit locations, equipment positions, assigned responsibilities, over and over. Engine fire, cabin smoke, emergency landing, water evacuation, all mentally reviewed before the aircraft even leaves the runway. And the posture helps reinforce that focus. It acts almost like a mental trigger, a signal that says, stay alert, stay prepared. In high-pressure professions, routines like this are extremely important. Pilots use detailed checklists before every flight. Surgeons follow preparation rituals before operations. Athletes repeat routines before major performances. These behaviors reduce mistakes under stress. And in aviation, reducing mistakes saves lives. What's fascinating is that passengers aren't instructed to sit this way, even though the same physical forces apply to everyone on board. That's because passengers have different priorities during emergencies. They may need their hands free to brace themselves, protect children, shield their head, follow instructions quickly. Flight attendants, however, have a completely different role. They are the emergency system inside the cabin, and that system only works if the crew remains physically capable after impact. Over time, this posture became standardized across airlines worldwide, not because it looks professional, not because it became tradition, but because decades of aviation data supported it. And aviation is obsessed with data. Every incident gets analyzed. Every evacuation gets studied. Every injury teaches new lessons. That's one reason commercial flying eventually became one of the safest forms of transportation ever created. Not because emergencies stopped happening, but because aviation learned from every single one. And that's what makes this tiny routine so fascinating. To most passengers, it looks significant, almost invisible. But hidden behind that small movement are decades of crash analysis, biomechanics research, emergency psychology, survival studies, real-world aviation experience, all condensed into one posture, one moment, one small movement most people never notice. So next time you're sitting on a plane waiting for takeoff, look toward the cabin crew. While passengers are thinking about vacations, business trips, or what movie to watch first, the flight attendants are preparing for something very different. The possibility, however unlikely, that they may need to protect hundreds of people within seconds. And sometimes, that preparation begins with something as simple as sitting on their hands. This is ordinary things, deep history, where even the smallest routines usually have the deepest stories behind them. Thanks for watching.